I always believed that family was everything. I sacrificed my time, my dreams, and even my happiness to support them. I never questioned their love or loyalty because in my heart, I thought we were unbreakable. But I was wrong. It all changed with a single phone call. I still remember the way my hands trembled as I held the phone, my pulse pounding in my ears. "I am so sorry. I did not know how to tell you this sooner." The voice on the other end was hesitant, almost afraid. A chill ran down my spine. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. My mind raced through every possibility, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to hear. "They took everything," the voice finally admitted, "and they did not even hesitate." My breath caught in my throat, my stomach twisted. I struggled to process the words, to make sense of them. The people I trusted the most, the ones I would have given my life for, had betrayed me in a way I never imagined. At that moment, I realized one thing. I had been blind. But not anymore. I grew up believing that love was measured by sacrifice. My parents always struggled financially, but they did everything they could to provide for me and my younger sister, Lily. We were not wealthy, but we had each other, and that was enough. Or at least, that was what I told myself. My father worked long hours at a factory, coming home exhausted and covered in grease. My mother took on sewing jobs from home, her hands always raw from the hours she spent stitching clothes for other people. Despite our struggles, they never let us go to bed hungry. They did not buy things for themselves. Every dollar was stretched, every sacrifice made for us. I admired them for that. I wanted to be just like them, selfless, giving, always putting family first. As I got older, I started to understand just how hard life really was. I saw my parents argue about bills behind closed doors, their voices hushed but strained. I saw my father come home with slumped shoulders and tired eyes, my mother holding back tears as she calculated how to make a few dollars last another week. I wanted to help. I needed to help. At 16, I got my first job at a local diner, bussing tables and washing dishes. It was exhausting, but I did not care. Every paycheck I brought home felt like a victory. I handed the money to my mother without a second thought, telling her to use it for whatever we needed. She would always hesitate before taking it, but in the end, she never refused. By the time I was in college, I was juggling multiple jobs. I worked at the library during the day, took evening shifts at a grocery store, and tutored kids on the weekends. My own dreams faded into the background. I had wanted to study business, maybe start something of my own one day, but those ideas seemed selfish when my family needed me. So I let go of them. Lily, on the other hand, never had to worry about money. I made sure of that. I paid for her books, her clothes, even her dorm fees when she got into university. She was smart and ambitious, and I wanted her to have every opportunity I never did. I told myself that one day, it would all be worth it. When our father got sick, everything changed. The factory work had taken a toll on his lungs, and the medical bills were overwhelming. My mother was too stressed to handle it all, so I stepped in. I took on even more hours, barely sleeping, barely living. I did not think twice about draining my savings to cover his treatments. It was family. That was what you did for family. For years, I carried the weight of responsibility. I put my needs aside, thinking that one day, things would get better. That one day, my sacrifices would be recognized, appreciated. I was wrong. When my father passed away, I was devastated, but I did not have the luxury to grieve. There were still bills to pay, a house to keep, a family to support. My mother became distant, sinking into her own world of sorrow. Lily, who had just graduated, started talking about her future, her plans to move out, to explore the world. I was happy for her, but a part of me felt something I did not want to admit. I felt abandoned. Even so, I kept going. I worked harder, took fewer breaks, and made sure my mother never had to worry about money. I bought her a small house in a quiet neighborhood, thinking it would bring her peace. I covered everything, her groceries, her bills, even her little luxuries. I never once asked for anything in return. Then, one day, I overheard a conversation that shattered everything I believed. I had stopped by my mother's house unannounced, wanting to surprise her with some of her favorite pastries. As I walked through the door, I heard her talking to Lily. Their voices were low, but the words cut through me like a knife. "He acts like a martyr," my mother said, her tone dismissive, like we owe him something. Lily sighed. "He does everything for us, Mom. You cannot say he has not sacrificed. That was his choice," my mother replied. "No one asked him to." I felt my breath catch in my throat. My chest tightened. I wanted to believe I had misheard, that I was imagining things. But I was not. Those words, so casually spoken, were real. And they destroyed me. For years, I had given them everything. I had put them first in every decision, every moment of my life. And yet, to them, it was not gratitude I deserved. It was dismissal. My sacrifices were not seen as love, but as something I had done for my own sake, as if I had been keeping score. I stepped back, my hands trembling. I did not confront them. I did not ask why. I just left. The pastries were still in my hands, untouched. I walked to my car, placed them on the passenger seat, and just sat there. My entire life felt like a lie. That night, I thought about every decision I had ever made. Every moment I had put them above myself. And I realized something painful. I had never truly lived for myself. My life had been shaped by the needs of others, and in the end, they did not even care. I knew I had to change. I did not know how, but I knew that if I kept going like this, I would lose myself completely. And for the first time in my life, I asked myself a question I had never dared to consider. What if I started putting myself first? The thought terrified me, but it also ignited something inside me, a spark of something I had long forgotten. Hope. The first time I ignored the warning signs, I told myself I was overthinking. Families are supposed to help each other, right? That is what I believed. My parents had always struggled financially. They were not careless, just unlucky. At least, that is how I saw it. My father had lost his job when I was a teenager, and my mother did her best working part-time. I had to grow up fast, picking up side jobs just to help out. I never complained. That was what family did. By the time I was in my 20s, I was working full-time while studying in the evenings. It was exhausting, but I kept going because I had a dream, to build a stable life, not just for myself, but for my family. My parents depended on me, and so did my younger brother, Daniel. He was still in high school, and I wanted him to have every opportunity I never had. When I finally landed a well-paying job after college, I felt relief, but also a deep responsibility. My parents had supported me emotionally, even if they could not financially. So, when my mother called me one evening, voice hesitant but hopeful, asking if I could cover their mortgage payment for the month, I did not think twice. Of course, I would help. It was just one time. Or so I thought. Months passed, and the requests became more frequent. First, it was the electricity bill. Then, the car broke down. Then, Daniel needed money for a school trip. Every time I told myself, it is temporary. Once they get back on their feet, it will stop. But it never did. I worked long hours, taking on extra shifts. While my friends went on vacations, I was wiring money home. When I suggested that my father look for work, my mother would sigh and say, "He is trying, sweetheart. The job market is tough." Years went by, and nothing changed. Except me. I started feeling the weight of it all. I wanted to save for my future, maybe buy a home one day, but every time I tried, there was another emergency. My mother always had a way of making me feel guilty if I hesitated. "You know we would do the same for you," she would say. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. Then there was Daniel. I adored my little brother, but as he grew older, I noticed something unsettling. He had no ambition. While I worked tirelessly, he coasted through life, expecting me to fund his hobbies and whims. He would call and ask for money, never saying thank you, just assuming it was his right. "You are doing so well," he would say. "It is not a big deal for you." And I let it slide because he was family. The turning point came when I met James. He was kind, ambitious, and for the first time in my life, I had someone who saw me, not as a provider, but as a person. We started talking about building a life together, and for the first time, I dared to dream about something for myself. I was nervous about telling my family that James and I were planning to buy a house. I expected them to be happy for me. Instead, my mother's voice turned sharp. "A house? How can you think about that when we are struggling?" Struggling? After years of my support, I had assumed things had improved. But they had not. My father still did not have a stable job. Daniel had dropped out of college and was living at home, doing nothing. "You do not need a house right now," my mother continued. "That money could help us catch up on bills." James noticed my hesitation. "You have done enough for them," he said gently. "They need to stand on their own." But the guilt was unbearable. Against my better judgment, I gave in. I put my house savings on hold and sent more money. James was disappointed, but he did not push me. He just asked, "When does it end?" I did not have an answer. A few months later, James proposed. It was the happiest moment of my life. But when I told my family, their reactions were anything but joyful. "How much did that ring cost?" my mother asked immediately. "I hope you are not expecting us to contribute to the wedding," my father added with a chuckle. Daniel's only response was, "You are going to have less money for us now, huh?" It stung. Not one of them said, "Congratulations." Still, I brushed it off. Maybe they were just surprised. Maybe they would come around. I invited them over for dinner, hoping to share my excitement. But instead of celebrating, they spent the entire evening complaining about their struggles. And then, the inevitable happened. "We need a little help," my mother said, setting down her fork, "just to get through the next few months." Something inside me cracked. "How much?" I asked, dreading the answer. She hesitated, then said, 20,000. I felt the air leave my lungs. 20,000? For what? "Just some debts we need to clear. It would really help." For the first time in my life, I said no. The look on my mother's face was one I had never seen before. Disappointment mixed with something else. Something uglier. "We have always supported you," she said coldly. "And now, when we need you the most, you are turning your back on us?" Supported me? My voice shook. "I have been supporting all of you for years. When does it stop? When do I get to live my own life?" My father scoffed. "We thought you were different. We thought family meant something to you." Daniel just shook his head. "Guess we know where we stand now." That night, I cried in James's arms. "Did I do the right thing?" I asked. "You did," he assured me. "But they are not done with you yet." He was right. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of missed calls and messages. My mother had called our relatives, painting me as ungrateful and selfish. After everything we did for her, she had said, she abandoned us. Relatives started calling, guilt-tripping me. "They are your parents. They raised you. How can you be so heartless?" I felt sick. No one knew the full story. No one knew the years I had given up for them. And no one cared. A week later, my parents showed up at my apartment, unannounced. My mother was crying. My father was furious. And Daniel was just there, arms crossed. "We need that money," my mother pleaded. "Please." "I do not have it," I said, even though I did. It was the hardest lie I had ever told. My father's face twisted in anger. "You do. You are just choosing not to help." "That is right," I said, my voice steady. "I am choosing myself for once." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then my mother stood up, wiping her tears. "You will regret this." As they walked out, Daniel muttered under his breath, "I always knew you were selfish." The door slammed shut, and I stood there, shaking. James wrapped his arms around me. "It is over," he whispered. But I knew it was not. Not yet. I had always believed that family meant loyalty, that no matter what happened, we would always stand by each other. I thought that if I gave enough, sacrificed enough, and proved my love through my actions, they would love me in return. But I was wrong. The betrayal did not happen in one moment. It was not a single event that broke me. It was the realization that I had been blind for years, that everything I thought was love was just convenience for them. That morning, I woke up early as usual. I made breakfast for my daughter, packed her school bag, and forced a smile as she hugged me goodbye. I was exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that weighed on my bones. But I had no time to rest. There were bills to pay, groceries to buy, and another long shift waiting for me. I had been struggling for months, but I never told my parents. I never asked them for help. In my mind, it was my responsibility to take care of them, not the other way around. That afternoon, I received a call from the bank. I was on my lunch break, sipping a cheap cup of coffee, when my phone rang. At first, I thought it was a routine call, maybe a security check, but the moment the banker spoke, my stomach dropped. "Miss, I just wanted to confirm the full withdrawal of your account funds this morning." "What?" My voice barely came out. "What withdrawal?" The banker hesitated. "The one for the full balance. The transfer was authorized under a shared account holder. It was processed a few hours ago." My mind went blank. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. "What shared account holder?" I asked, but I already knew. "Your mother and father." The authorization was signed electronically using their credentials. I gripped the edge of the table, my fingers turning numb. Everything. Every single dollar I had saved. My emergency fund, my daughter's school fees, our rent. Gone. I ended the call, my hands shaking. My entire body felt cold. I tried logging into my banking app, praying it was a mistake. But there it was. My account balance. 47 cents. I called my mother immediately. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before she picked up. "Hey, sweetheart," she said casually, as if she had not just robbed me. "Where is my money?" My voice cracked. There was a silence, then a sigh. "We needed it." "You... what?" "We needed it," she repeated, this time with less patience. "Your father and I have been struggling. You know how expensive life is. We raised you, gave you everything, and this is how you talk to us? You took every last dollar. That was my daughter's future, our rent, our food." She scoffed. "You will earn more. We needed it now." I could not breathe. "You did not even ask me. You did not even tell me." "You are being dramatic," she said dismissively. "You have always been too sensitive." I could not believe what I was hearing. The woman who had held my hand when I was sick, who had wiped my tears as a child, was now the same person who had stolen from me without a second thought. "You always act like you are the only one who struggles," she continued. "But your sister needs help too." My stomach twisted. "My sister? You gave her my money?" "She is starting a business," she said defensively. "She needed a loan." "A loan?" My voice was shaking. "You did not even ask me." "We did what was best for the family. For the family." That was always their excuse. But I was part of this family too. I felt like I was suffocating. "You knew I was struggling. You knew how hard I was working. And you still did this to me?" "Stop making this about you." I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking. My vision was blurry. But I refused to cry. I sat there for a long time, staring at the wall. I had spent my entire life putting them first. I had sacrificed everything for them. My time, my money, my happiness. And in the end, none of it mattered. They had taken everything from me without guilt, without hesitation. And now, they expected me to stay silent. I did not go home that night. I could not. I drove around aimlessly, my thoughts spinning. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand justice. But what justice was there? It was my own parents, my own family. At midnight, my phone rang again. It was my father. I let it ring. Then my mother called. Then my sister. One after another, like a storm I could not escape. I finally answered. My mother's voice was sharp. Why are you ignoring us? I almost laughed. Are you serious? We did what was best for everyone, she said. You always talk about family, but the moment we need help, you act like a victim. I gritted my teeth. You did not need help. You stole from me. She scoffed. Stop acting like a child. Something inside me snapped. Do not ever call me again, I said coldly. She gasped. Excuse me? You heard me. You are being ridiculous. No, I said. I have been ridiculous my whole life, letting you use me, letting you take everything from me. But this is where it ends. You do not mean that, she said. You will regret this. I took a deep breath. I will not. And then I ended the call. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. The next morning, I changed my number. I blocked them all. For weeks, I waited for the guilt to come. I waited to feel regret, to feel like I was making a mistake. But instead, I felt something I had never felt before. Peace. They did not care about me. They never had. I was just a source of money, a convenience. And when I stopped being useful, they discarded me like I was nothing. But I was not nothing. I was a person. I was a mother. I was someone who deserved love, respect, and peace. They had taken everything from me. But I would not let them take my future. Not anymore. I expected them to come back. People like my parents did not believe in consequences. They had spent their entire lives taking without giving, demanding without gratitude. They thought I would cave, that I would come running back like I always did. But this time was different. I did not answer their calls. I did not reply to their messages. I did not react when my sister sent me long, guilt-tripping texts about how I was tearing the family apart. I was done. At first, they pretended like nothing had happened. I heard from a distant cousin that my parents were still living their lives, as if everything was normal. My sister had launched her business, using my stolen savings, and my parents were proudly telling everyone that she was going to be successful. I stayed silent. Then, slowly, things started to unravel. The business my sister had opened was a disaster from the beginning. She had no experience, no knowledge, and no real plan. Just money that she thought would magically turn into more money. She spent recklessly, buying expensive office furniture, renting a high-end location, and hiring employees she did not need. Within 3 months, the business was failing. Customers were not coming in. The bills were piling up. The employees started quitting when their paychecks were delayed. And then, one day, the landlord locked the doors. She had not paid rent for 2 months. I found out through social media. She had posted a long, emotional rant about how the system is against young entrepreneurs and how people do not support small businesses. Not once did she take responsibility. Not once did she admit that she had taken money that was not hers. I shook my head and scrolled past. With my sister's business gone, my parents had no choice but to face reality. They had used my savings to cover not just my sister's venture, but also their own expenses. They had been living beyond their means for years, using me as a safety net. And now, that net was gone. The bills started stacking up. The mortgage was overdue, the credit cards were maxed out, and suddenly, the people they had always relied on, me, were no longer there to bail them out. I heard from another relative that my father had tried taking out a loan, but with his bad credit, no bank would approve him. My mother had started selling her jewelry, but even that was not enough. They were drowning. And I was finally free. 2 months after I cut them off, they showed up at my apartment. I was in the middle of making dinner when I heard the pounding on my door. My daughter was in the living room, coloring, and I told her to stay put. When I opened the door, my mother and father stood there, looking desperate. I did not feel anger. I did not feel sadness. I felt nothing. We need to talk, my mother said. I crossed my arms. No, we do not. My father sighed heavily. We are in trouble. We need help. I let out a small laugh. Help? The same way I needed help when you stole from me? It was not stealing, my mother snapped. We are family. Families share. I shook my head. You did not share. You took. Without asking. And now you want me to fix your mess? We raised you, my father shouted. We gave you everything. No, I said calmly. You did not. I took care of myself. I worked for everything I have. And when I needed you, you turned your backs on me. My mother's face turned red. So you are just going to abandon us? Like we are nothing? I looked at them for a long moment. Then I said, I learned from the best. And I shut the door. They banged on it for a few minutes, screaming, cursing, demanding that I listen. But I had already stopped listening a long time ago. That was the last time I saw them. A few weeks later, I heard from an uncle that they had lost the house. They had nowhere to go. My father had to take a low-paying job after years of refusing to work. My mother had moved in with a distant relative, but the arrangement was not stable. My sister? She had disappeared. When her business failed, she left town, cutting contact with everyone, including my parents. The golden child, the one they had sacrificed everything for, had abandoned them the moment they were no longer useful. The irony was not lost on me. For years, I had been the one they used, the one they drained dry. And yet, when they needed someone the most, it was not me who left them. It was their favorite, the one they had betrayed me for. I could have gloated, I could have laughed, I could have told them, I told you so, but I did not. Because in the end, their downfall was not my victory. My victory was in my peace. For the first time in my life, I was living for myself. I had a stable home. I had money in my account. I had a future that was not built on sacrifice and pain. And most importantly, I had my daughter. She was the only family I needed. One night, as I tucked her into bed, she looked up at me with those big, curious eyes. Mommy? She asked. Are Grandma and Grandpa coming back? I brushed a strand of hair from her face and kissed her forehead. No, baby, I said softly. They are not. She nodded as if she understood. Then she smiled. That is okay. We have each other. Tears burned my eyes, but this time they were not from pain. They were from relief, from freedom, from knowing that I had finally broken the cycle, and that, no matter what, I would never let history repeat itself. Life felt different after I shut that door. For the first time in years, I was not living under the weight of guilt, obligation, and emotional manipulation. There was no more waking up in the middle of the night, wondering how I was going to fix someone else's mess. No more anxiety about the next favor, the next sacrifice, the next betrayal. I was free. But freedom, I realized, was not just about cutting ties. It was about unlearning everything I had been taught, about family, about love, about self-worth. It was about healing. I spent so much of my life believing that love meant sacrifice, that being a good daughter meant enduring pain, putting myself last, and giving without limits. I had to teach myself a new lesson. Love is not something you prove through suffering. It is something that should be returned. And if it is not, then it is not love at all. It took time to break the habits I had carried for years. At first, I still felt guilty whenever I spent money on myself. A small voice in my head would whisper, "You could have given this to them." But then, I would look at my daughter. I would see how happy she was, how safe she felt, how much better our lives had become since I had let go of the people who drained me. And I knew I had done the right thing. I did not reach out to my parents again. Not on their birthdays, not on holidays. Not when I heard through relatives that my father had lost his job again, or that my mother had tried, unsuccessfully, to guilt another family member into taking them in. My sister never resurfaced, at least not in my life. Some said she had moved in with a boyfriend in another city. Others said she was still blaming everyone else for her failures. None of it mattered to me, because for the first time in my life, I was focused on myself. I started therapy. I got promoted at work. I even allowed myself to dream again, something I had long forgotten how to do. I took my daughter on her first vacation. We went to the beach, just the two of us. I watched as she ran toward the waves, laughing, her arms stretched wide as if she could hug the entire ocean. And in that moment, I knew I had not lost anything. I had gained everything. One evening, as I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, a thought crossed my mind. If my parents had asked for help instead of taking, I would have given it. If they had valued me the way I valued them, I would still be in their lives. If they had treated me like family instead of a resource, things would have been different. But they made their choice, and I made mine. The hardest lesson I learned was this: family is not defined by blood. It is defined by love, by respect, by mutual care. And sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. Because at the end of the day, you cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot set yourself on fire to keep others warm. And you do not owe your life to people who would never do the same for you. As I tucked my daughter into bed that night, she wrapped her arms around me. "I love you, Mommy," she whispered sleepily. I smiled, my heart full. "I love you too, baby." And in that moment, I realized I had broken the cycle. I had created the family I always wanted, and that was enough. That was everything.